Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's my pleasure to be here today with Kering's Director of Sustainability Operations, Michael Beutler, who's been with Kering for 8 years. And before that, he's worked at such companies as SAP, DHL, PwC, and Ford. And I just wanted to note that Kering was the first in its sector to implement a science-based target and is looking to expand beyond climate change to set SBTs across other impact areas, keeping the principles of planetary boundaries in mind. So with that, I'd like to start asking questions and getting some insight from you, Michael. So how do you decide which ways the company can be more sustainable? I know that's a large question, but if you can break it down for us.
So first of all, thank you, Lydia. Part of what we did is François Pinault, who's our chairman and CEO, and our head of sustainability, Marie-Claire Deveux, met with all the brands, management teams and design teams to help formulate a strategy around sustainability, because we wanted to be something that was owned by our brand. We're a collection of 13, if I get the number right now, brands, because that number changes depending on how we count that. We're a collection of brands, and each brand has its own unique personality. And you saw in that video, there's everything from Ulysse Nardin, which is a watch company sort of based on boating watches, to Gucci, which you all know. So each brand has its different personality. It's located in a different place. It has a different spirit to it. So it's important to engage them in the process. And through that process, we created our 2025 strategy, which is around 3 key pillars. And basically those people are I almost said the pillars, care about people, care about the planet, collaborate with people, and then create, which is about innovation. So a lot of what guides us is that strategy. Mm-hmm. And then there's certain things, because that sounds very theoretical. Obviously, we're in a fashion school, so bringing that into more reality is sort of what our job is, to take that strategy and work with the brands to help implement it into what they make, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're working with all these different brands, how challenging is it for you to figure out how to allocate resources?
Well, for us, the first thing we do is we think measurement is very important. So we developed some tools. You mentioned science-based targets, but and we were the first company in fashion to do that. But before that, we did something called the environmental profit and loss. And what that was about, because most time in fashion, we think about how something looks. Later on, you'll think about how it sells. It's more about the business side and the creative side. But oftentimes, we didn't think about how it's made. And how it's made comes everything from how the cotton is grown. You're talking about leather. You're dealing with ranching, wool, same thing. Mining for watches. So a lot of the discovery for us was really understanding that part, like how are things made? Like where was it made? Where does it come from? What are the processes to do that? What are the resources that go into that? We speak of resources. Mm-hmm. So, what's it take? How much water does it take to make a cotton T-shirt? How much gold and that gold that you're using in the watch? What are the impacts of that from an environmental perspective of the mining, which can be everything from the land use to pollution, because to basically gold mining is kind of a dirty business. So those are the kind of things we looked at and measured that across our entire supply chain. And then we actually monetize it, put a figure to it, because in fashion, people usually understand things like money, unfortunately. That's the reality of the business. And so we put in terms that we could say, okay, if we paid back nature for everything we did, we would have written a check for 800 million euros, which would be like almost $850 million or something like that. So it gave us a very concrete way to say to our brands, okay, this is what we need to work on reducing. And then we set a target in our strategy to reduce that by 40%. And so with our brands, and with us, we're measuring and monitoring our impacts for like everything we do. So even though it's, we're, of course, it's a creative business, we're backing it up with, I'll say, real analytics and data to make sure that we're really taking into account our environmental impact and doing something about it.
So you came to this 40% metric that you wanted to reduce by, but is there any compromise being made to get to that number? I mean, obviously this is a portfolio of luxury brands. Does anything fall by the wayside when you are factoring that impact in?
Well, I think it's really interesting if people think about sustainability in fashion, they think, okay, the designer needs to use sustainable materials. First of all, when we began, the impression of sustainable materials was ugly materials. So just to be honest, because people thought of organic cotton as kind of like burlap or something that wasn't very attractive. And the reality is what we've discovered, since it's any material that you make, whether it's wool, whether it's cotton, it can be sustainably done or not so sustainably done. But part of the challenge is that you want to focus on you only have so much time and energy to focus. And if you focus on things before the fashion show, if the designer's creating like 300 looks, you don't know how many looks are actually going to end up being successful. That a merchandiser are going to choose, they're actually going to end up being in the stores and really being manufactured. So what we've done a lot of effort is making sure we knew once something is successful, how to, in a sense, create the supply chain behind it to make it more sustainable. And that's a challenge because the fashion industry is really fast moving. Right. You think of the cycle of fashion being, every 6 weeks. The cycle of nature, which is everything we're wearing in this room, even if you're wearing petroleum, came from nature at some point. Petroleum maybe 400 million years ago, but everything we do is from nature, everything we use. And so to link those cycles together, when you think about the cycle of nature, of growing and harvesting, you think about the manufacturing cycle, how long it takes to get things to get through the supply chain. You have to sort of link all those things up. And that's one of the key challenges in the fashion industry is when we have that fast mindset to at the same time think of clever ways to ensure that we're sort of linking it to, I'll say, the slower cycles that we have that will make it more sustainable.
Can you give an example from one of the brands something that has changed, or is?
We have one example, I'll say, even with the group, is that we're one of the largest buyers of ethical gold. Okay. So we're one of the first buyers of that, but now we're one of the largest buyers, and nearly all our brands are working toward our target, which is also in our strategy of 100% ethical gold. We've had other examples from our brands where it's been everything from things that they do talk about, which are more and more. Gucci's launched a site called Equilibrium that talks about their sustainability perspective, so that's very exciting. And then we have other brands that are actively actually creating whole collections that are mainly sustainable materials, and soon we'll be talking about it. Because the problem in fashion in general is you have capsule collections that are sustainable, but you don't have scale large sellers that are sustainable. And we actually have that starting to happen now. It's actually a really interesting time because now we're beginning to see that's taking off, and not even talking about it, not even selling the sustainable, but just doing it that way because kind of that's the right. It's more in the DNA of the
It's
brand.
the right thing to do.
And we have younger and younger design teams that really they're pushing that. At the beginning, like we were pushing that as sustainability people. Now we have like, design teams that are actually pushing as hard as we are because they want to do things in a different way.
Well, so you mentioned the supply chain just a little bit ago, and I'm wondering how important it is to provide transparency to the supply chain for the consumer. Is that something that builds brand loyalty? Are you committed to that?
I think that's part of that process when we did the environmental profit and loss is first you need to understand transparency yourself. So when you look at a shirt like a shirt I'm wearing, where's the cotton come from? What not only just where it comes from, but is it organic cotton? Is it conventional cotton? So all those things come to mind. What processes did it go through? So first you need to understand yourself, basically where your stuff comes from and how it's made. And it sounds like it's really simple, but I can tell you, most fashion brands do not know that. Now more and more you're seeing that with of course we did that with the environmental profit and loss. You're seeing tools like the Hagen Index, the Sustainability Apparel Coalition, other things, trying to create that transparency. But I think it's key first for two things. One, it's key for companies to understand it and brands. It's also key for consumers, and that's us, to ask. I mean, everything, not just fashion, but I think with food we think about that. It's labeled on food, but it didn't used to be.
Right.
It's labeled because everybody asks it. So when you go buy an apple, like I live in Paris, I like to buy apples from France because I don't want an apple that's been transported halfway across the world so
Sure.
I can eat it.
Yeah.
So that's something, but it's labeled that way. But why can't fashion be like that? And I think that's where we usually associate ourselves with the design, where the design content comes from. Sometimes with where like our brand, our groups, I'm sorry, the brands in our group make almost everything in Italy, but the raw materials come from all over the world. Silk comes from China. Wool can come from Australia, New Zealand. So it's important to gain that understanding. It's important for us to ask.
And how much are you providing to the consumer of that transparency?
Good question. So we provide like a lot of the things like the environmental profit and loss, we open source.
Okay.
And we're even going further with kind of open sourcing that on a data platform so people can actually like play with the data and understand things better. So that's, I think, a really, really big step. And we've shared that with a lot of other fashion brands as well. I think the other challenge in fashion is the way things move so quickly, you don't always know for an individual piece where things are from. But you do know overall where you're sourcing your raw materials. So that's a challenge too. The first thing to understand is what kind of raw materials are you using and where are they from? Because if, for instance, if 90% of cotton you're buying is organic cotton, pretty good chance that in any item you have, at least that it's either going to be 100% organic cotton or darn close to it. So part of the thing is really to get the raw material part in order, and then it leaves choices for the designers. It doesn't make it a matter of designer like you having to pick a sustainable material, because basically any design then you can make sustainably.
So how do you monitor the supply chain to ensure that sustainability is happening all the way through?
So we do that a few ways. I mentioned environmental profit and loss. That's one way. We do a lot of programs on the ground. Everything from projects in Mongolia with goats and cashmere, because cashmere is one of the most impactful animal fibers that we use, because cashmere goats eat up a lot of plants, and which when they eat up the plants, they basically tear them up. So goats are kind of notorious. Goats will eat almost anything. So when they tear up the topsoil, in this case in the Mongolian desert, it created dust storms. It helped fuel the dust storms, and that's one of the issues where you see direct impact because the Chinese government actually limited cashmere production because of that. So we're doing a project on sustainable cashmere, for instance. So that's an example like on the ground where we actually can see a difference.
So have you seen that consumers have been more engaged with the individual brands since you started rolling out these initiatives?
I think it's funny because we didn't really do it because we did it actually before the consumer was really asking for it.
Is that right?
And I think in some markets we're seeing more and more requests. Um, I think like New York is going to be, for instance, in the U.S., parts of the U.S., people may be very open to sustainability and very conscious of it. London is another example of that. Other parts of the world, not so much. But definitely with Gen Z, we're seeing at least, we keep hearing data saying it's driving decision making. I think it will more and more. But more, I think, where we see it happening is about trust in a brand. Like, are you doing what you say you're doing? So when we talk about different things we're doing on sustainability, like sustainable gold, like the cashmere I mentioned, we're doing things in the supply chain, auditing. This is not a very appealing topic, but it's reality. Animal welfare, because any leather, which is a big part of fashion business, wool, there's millions and millions of animals that are concerned with that. And so we're actually looking at how to do auditing to make sure that the humane standards are being put in place. Everything from even grazing, open grazing, to all stages, I'll say, of all the animals' life, that it's actually being done in a good way. So that's one of the ways we're monitoring supply chain. And I think that's another area that consumers are asking a lot. There's certain topics that get a lot of attention. That's one of them. Another is things like living wage, which isn't such a big issue in luxury, but we're looking deeper into supply chain because we're depending on supply chains like cotton and other things that can have significant impacts on people as well. So it's a very, I think right now it's a time that people are asking more and more questions. People probably in this audience are more and more conscious of, I would ask for a show of hands, but we can't really see anything because the lights are so bright.
The lights are very bright.
But
How many of you, just let's put your hands up, how many of you are concerned when you go shop for a garment? Well, that's, from what I can see, that's a lot.
That's a lot, yeah. So that,
Thank you.
if we asked that question 10 years ago, I'm not sure.
Would not be the same answer.
It wouldn't be the same answer. So that's what's really interesting is a lot of people now are really concerned with it. And now we have tools, for transparency, we have tools now that you can link the two things together. So I think that'll be an interesting area as going forward, is how we take all this data, because we're collecting a lot of data on sustainability, supply chains of raw materials, and how we take that and put it more into the hands of the consumer will be very interesting. That's kind of, to me, one of the next things to come.
Well, I want to talk about challenges a little bit because none of this gets done in a vacuum. You don't just flip a switch and say, okay, we're going to be more sustainable and more transparent. So I have a twofold question. One is, how do you get everybody on board? Because like you said, 10 years ago, these kind of initiatives really weren't on the table. People weren't asking for them and brands weren't really working towards them. So from a leadership perspective, how do you get buy-in?
That's a great question. First answer comes to mind is sustained effort. Because, first of all, in our business, a lot's going on. You're worried about getting the next collection out. You're worried about if it's going to be successful. There's some issues in the supply chain and you can't, there's always stuff going on that is stressful. Or you're trying to open a store and there's a problem, even with some of the logistics of the store opening. There's all this stuff going on. And when you're in the business side of fashion, it's a lot. I mean, it's not like fashion the fashion business is an easy business. It's kind of high stress and it's fast moving. So at the same time, then you come along with people are talking about sustainability. What's that mean? It's like there's another thing I need to pay attention to. So part of it is, one, putting it in the context of, like, when we're opening a store to have which we have now, standards around what a sustainable store is. So the actual materials that we're sourcing for the store are more sustainable. When we're looking at, we have now something we call Kering standards, which basically says what our sourcing standards are for the group in terms of raw materials, in terms of production processes. So part of it is sort of building that groundwork, but that took us a while. Part of it we had to measure and understand what the big impacts were. Then we had to really understand how to actually change them. And then we had to talk and re-talk to the brands about what that means. And also learn ourselves. Because, you know, there's some things around, I'll give an example, chrome-free tanning. How many people here are wearing something made of leather today?
Almost everyone.
Almost everyone. And most leather today is tanned, which is, you know, tanning is a nice way of saying taking it from a hide, which is kind of, you know, I want a better word, bloody and dirty, to something beautiful and finished. And it's really a process of taking something organic and making it inorganic so it will last, and putting chemicals and all kinds of other stuff. So one big thing we focused on is using something called heavy metal-free or chrome-free tanning. But that takes a long time. Now the industry, because we were the first to really push for that, and now the industry is actually, it's becoming a thing that the industry is grabbing onto, and the tanners and things like that at first are like, no, it's impossible, you can't do it. And now it's something where they want to do it because it's, you know, it's better, it makes less pollution for them, for the workers in the factory. It's better all the way around. So, but it takes years and sustained effort. Same with the ethical gold too. We had to build up not only for us the demand within our brands, but build up the supply at the same time. Because in a lot of times in sustainable materials, there's not a lot of supply. Like ZQ wool is a great example. It's a wool from New Zealand, very sustainably done, using regenerative agriculture. But there isn't an unlimited supply for that. So you kind of need the supply, and then you need someone to use it, and then you get more supply, you know, because it's farming and agriculture, you can't just like add, you know, open a new factory. It's a farm, so they need to raise, you know, they need to maybe change how they're doing things. They need to dedicate, you know, some land. They need to plant. They need to do this. They need to do that. So, in a sense, it's sustained effort. But at the same time, we have a CEO who really believes in it.
Yeah, I was going to say, this sounds like a top-down mandate type thing.
It's definitely a top-down mandate, but it's a top-down mandate that's been consistent. It's not like one year he said, you know what, sustainability is really important to me. Next year it's like, no, it's not important. He's become more committed and more passionate as time has gone on, and has really become a champion beyond just in Kering, but a champion like with the G7, which is coming up in France later this year, on climate change, on biodiversity. So he's really taken a position that's very, very, I'll say, vocal, beyond just, you know, luxury, beyond just fashion, to really make a statement about the importance of it.
Well, I think I only have time for one more question before we turn it over to this lovely audience. So I want to ask you, what responsibility do you think brands have to continue to push these boundaries of sustainability? You know, Kering was first out the gate, so what do you see coming up?
I think if brands don't do that, we're going to run out of raw materials. And I say that because if you look at cotton, I saw a forecast of water supply in India, which is one of the main countries producing cotton. They're looking at a 25% shortage by 2025. So there's going to be a lot of stress on cotton. At the same time, we're making more, and the demand for cotton is growing and growing. So unless we use more sustainable practices with that, we will not have enough cotton to provide for the overall industry. And if I look at raw materials for luxury, silk, for instance, or cashmere. Cashmere is an example where it was overexploited. And now that's why we're working on ways to sustainably do it, because when I was young, like, cashmere was really rare. Then you saw cashmere everywhere. And then basically it depleted the soil of the Gobi Desert. So now we have to look at solutions like that, but not just Kering, but in terms of cross-industry, we need to think about how we stewardship, how we take care of these resources, which means how do we take care of the environment that provides them and the people, because there's a
Right.
whole people aspect of making sure we have the skills. Attracting the best people isn't just attracting the best designers, it's also in terms of manufacturing and making like the apparel business an industry of choice, not what a last resort when it comes to the production side.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Everybody always thinks about the designers, and they certainly face big challenges, when you are trying to attain a vision to be in a certain way constrained to use only certain materials. But some people find a freedom in having those boundaries. But certainly the apparel industry is changing on the ground, the manufacturing sector as well. And you talked about living wage. So that's an important responsibility going forward.